Hello, everybody, and welcome to our live fireside chat focusing on overcoming software engineering challenges. Over 240 people registered for this event. We really appreciate it. My name is Steve Taplin. I am the CEO of Sonatafy Technology. We are a US based company that focuses on nearshore software development and engineering. With me today is Abe Jarrett, industry veteran. And great guy, where Abe has a software engineering and software leadership background spanning from Apple and Microsoft and IBM and leading enormous engineering organizations. Abe, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Pleasure to be here.
Yep. If you would, Abe, as we're going to jump into key strategies of software engineering and challenges in 2025. Please give everybody on our fireside chat here some more background on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Southern California, went to school, Cal State Fullerton. I migrated my way up to Northern California, where I got my foot in the door at Netscape a while back, and that started off my career. I spent 25 years of it in Northern California, jumping from different companies, startups.
Pretty good place to be at the cutting edge of software engineering.
I enjoyed it. It was it really brings truth to the whole imposter syndrome, because there's so many smart people there. It really creates a competitive edge, and so you really learn to work hard, learn with a growth mindset, and dig in. But there's no better place than Northern California in the bubble of technology to really learn and grow and grow your career.
No doubt.
But yeah, I moved into fintech about 6 years ago. Love it. I love the fast moving digital transformation aspect of it, all the automation, and it's really given my my career a boost in terms of leveraging my background in architecture, fit client, full stack web application development, and growing teams and leading people, and also working in the nearshore, offshore, distributed development environment. So yeah, it's been great.
You are undoubtedly one of the most seasoned software engineering leaders I've ever met, from having been keys on keyboard to leading multiple organizations that have hundreds and hundreds of developers around the world. And so excited to have you here. And let's jump right in here. And, you know, the whole purpose of this is to talk about key challenges of 2025. And so first topic here, let's talk about AI integration overload. And I always laugh, Abe, if you were to line up 10 technical leaders in a room, I think you'd get 10 different answers of what AI is, how their organization's using it. What's your take on this of nice to have versus must have from an AI perspective in 2025?
Depending on whether you're an individual or a enterprise, you're going to have different motivations and goals to enable yourself with AI, but it competitive edge. So if you want to keep up, you need to be engaged in some factor of AI. So learning it, understanding how you can leverage it to create more performance for yourself and for the organization. So as an industry leader or a software engineering leader in a company, you want to be very familiar with all the security associated with it. The IP and data issues before you ever get started with it have to be sorted, because you need an enterprise level sandbox where you can protect all that, and then extend access to the AI tools, whether you're doing LLM or other, that enable people to start leveraging those tools within their day-to-day way of working. So their tooling, and then, you know, from an individual perspective, it's the efficiencies that you get from it. So you have to learn prompt engineering and all the other ways of leveraging the different AI platforms out there that have one benefit over another, and integrating those into your tool chain to get that uplift. But those are the things I would keep in mind about how to leverage AI and how to make it part of your way of working. There's so much out there. It's not a silver bullet, but it's moving so fast. If you don't keep up with it, you will get left behind, and then there'll be a massive hurdle for the growth curve and for the learning curve to cut down.
It kind of blows me away. On one breath, you'll see a large organization just let go the top or the lowest 15% performing software engineers, But on the flip side, they're hiring hundreds and hundreds of new AI engineers with
Right.
those capabilities. And there's definitely, as we look at how the markets have shifted, if from an engineering perspective, if you're not using AI to be more productive and have more output,
Yeah.
it can be a challenging environment.
Yeah. I mean, personally, it's very similar to keeping up with any new framework or technology, whether it be Kubernetes or cloud or other. You have to be on the cutting edge path. And when something as significant as AI is introduced that can accelerate an individual's efficiency and productivity, and then it's a multiplier across organizations and across an entire industry. If you aren't leveraging it, you're going to be, at the end of the line when it comes to looking at skills. So the two people have similar skill capabilities, but this one has AI. You're going to choose the one with AI because they're going to give you 40% lift on productivity. Right? So if you want to compete, you want to be on par with other people with similar skills, you need that extra lift. It's super important. But as a leader in an organization, if you want to keep up, you need to take the workforce you do have and then train them and enable them with those tools. And so there's a whole process around skill acquisition and enablement, leveraging AI that will AI enable your organization. And then you'll
let's touch on that, Abe. So, what can senior engineering leaders do for their organization to enable this throughout and help their all of their developers be able to utilize the right AI tools to increase productivity?
Yeah. So first, it's all the messaging internally around the safety associated with using it. So you don't want to use external tools outside of your corporate network because then that exposes leaks and that can shut down access to anything AI and create fear.
And
so
2 weeks ago, a Disney software engineer downloaded an AI tool that ended up getting a hack into their system and he was fired.
Yeah, or upload your entire repo into ChatGPT to do some work on it and find out all your IP is now.
Exactly. Even though there is a disclaimer on it that says they're not using your info, probably not a good idea to put your code base on it.
Right. So those are some of the things that you need to get trained on first. So first it's training, and then it's coordinating with your infrastructure team to buy those managed services, either build it in house and own the infrastructure for it, or use a managed service either like Copilot or other with Amazon or Google. But you need an enterprise sandbox to be safe within an organization, and then you can start giving access to tools that integrate in your tool chain, and like Visual Studio or other, and then you can start having those tools, those prompts actually write your tests, write your code, instrument your entire repo so that you can ask questions and create agents that actually find bugs in code and your scripts and QA and automatically generate lines of code that say go fix this. So there are a lot of ways to integrate it once you clear the hurdles of knowledge, safety, and security around how to use it. And then creating goals internally with your engineers to motivate them to go take those courses on a monthly or quarterly basis to target those critical skills so that you can then measure the growth and track the performance. So you want to be able to say at the end of the year, how well did we do? We gave everyone access to AI tools. How did you do? Did you get better? Are you faster? Are you solving more problems? So it's all the metrics you need to add on the back end to be able to show are you actually making improvements and taking advantage of the facilities that you're given and made available to you.
Well, and we highly encourage anyone, please send your questions and comments in the chat. And along these lines, here is a question from Truck Rudisil. What cost savings are you seeing leveraging AI in the software dev? What's your opinion on that, Abe?
Depending on I think there's a 40% lift on people who are aggressively trying to use it. It can be more, but for average developers who are writing code and are writing tests, like full stack engineers owning the full SDLC, we're seeing significant lift in terms of documentation, writing the archetypes, the skeletal structures for a service, and actually generating the tests. And then all they're responsible for is writing the backend code. And in many cases, you highlight the code and say, write my test, and it generates the test and with a little debugging of it. So it's about a 40% lift with an aggressive use of it. The biggest
And
challenge.
let me challenge you on that, Abe, for a minute. So that's assuming that the engineering leadership of that company has put all the right tools and enabled all the right things for developers to use to see that type of cost savings. Is that right?
Yes. If everything has been provided for you, there's no, you're not having to jump through hoops and do all your coding off site and then bring it back in once you've asked all your questions and solve your problems. If you're not having to do that level of jiggering to leverage AI within your organization, you're going to see 40%. So untethered access to internal AI tools will generate a 40% lift in general. Yeah, I know GitHub was seeing this lift. That was what they were reporting when they were using the tools. And many other organizations outside of our own are seeing it. Internally, we don't see 40% across the board. It really has a lot to do with the developer and how much they intentionally leverage it. But if they're using it for everything they're doing, and they're trying to squeeze as much as possible and find ways to automate with agents and prompting, and we even have people check in their prompts, as part of sharing the prompts, because that's the big thing is if you write a really good prompt, you want to share it. It's the core to using AI. So if you can write a really good prompt, you're going to facilitate tons of automation through AI.
So let's say you have a startup that maybe has 4 or 5 people on their engineering team. What advice would you give a startup like that who's, building, working on an MVP or enhancing their MVP and their product in the early stages? How would you advise them to take an AI approach for their team as opposed to an organization with 500 developers that's an established engineering team?
It really comes down to cost. It's not that expensive to jump on a Microsoft Copilot enterprise platform. You could use Llama and download the private one, but you're dealing with compute and managing all that. So it's a bit of a wash. It really depends on how much money you have to work with, whether you're going to use create your own tools, like use some open source, and how customized you want to make it will determine which way you want to go. But if you have a need to have an open platform approach, like what Amazon provides, where they provide the access to many different AI platforms, whether it be DeepSeek or other, or Copilot, or even Grok, all of those can be accessed through Amazon's platform. So if you need a different type of system, you would shoot for Amazon. If you need a dedicated Copilot ChatGPT type platform, you would go through Azure and so forth. So it really depends on what you're targeting. If you need multiple AI access capabilities, if you want to have failover, typically they say you're not going to just have one, you're going to have multiple. So if you want failover or you want access to multiples, then that's how you would do it.
Excellent. All right, let's go ahead and jump to the next topic here. Let's talk about what's going on with software engineering, the talent competition. One of the trends that we have seen is there's zero patience for anything but top performing developers right now. And top performing developers are in huge demand. And the mid-tier ones that maybe are good but not proactive are having a real hard time gaining work, as well as still the big issue of fresh out of college graduates. Although there's certainly the return to office push, it is harder to train new software engineers remotely.
Right.
What's your take on this?
It is highly competitive. There's been a lot of salary compression post-COVID. So a lot of companies are very sensitive to hiring right now because they don't want to go in any one direction and overhire or hire the wrong talent. So they're being very picky, and everyone's wanting to find that person that has AI experience to bring to the table to help train internally and move them along. AI is still one of those things where people are not sure what direction to invest to learn. And so people are darting in lots of different directions and they're acquiring skills that may be specialist in some areas, but not generalist. And I think until we get a really good curriculum that's helping people from college understand where to go to supplement their career and give them the foundation for learning AI relative to what companies they're working in, so they have a substantial toolkit to be productive with AI, they're going to have difficulties interviewing because they're not going to be able to sell themselves. From an existing developer perspective who's got 5 to 10 years of experience as a senior and hasn't jumped into AI, they're going to be having real hard times with companies who are on the aggressive AI adoption trend. So you really need to dig in on that front.
And Abe, it appears your connection is kind of bad with some buffering. If you could please try to refresh your screen, and if you need to rejoin, you've been frozen through a lot of the conversation, although we can't hear you well.
Okay, give me 1 second, and I'll refresh. Okay.
You bet. And talking about the fierce talent competition, we're seeing a lot of companies out there looking for talent in smaller markets, not the Northern California or Dallas or New York or other big hubs, but we're seeing people, try to hire in Midwest areas where they're requiring them to go to the office and they're getting them in a much lower cost. Because they're in a more rural area. And I'm always advising companies that you have to be careful, because as soon as those guys are trained up and seniors, there is no possible way they're going to stay with your company and not maximize their income. And welcome back, Abe. That seems to be better. We see you moving now, so that's great. Okay. It does kind of baffle me. Advice I'm always giving to young engineers, whether they're out of college or only a few years experience, is to take every AI class they can find around prompt engineering, get every certification. There's so many out there. Most of them I've seen are free or very low cost. Mm-hmm. And that's how I'm always pointing out, people get scared when they see mass layoffs in software. But then on the same side, look at how they're hiring, and the AI expertise is key. And you got to start somewhere, and there are so many free resources out there.
Yeah, I mean, companies need to be open to hiring from anywhere, and hybrid helps with that, or remote helps with that. If you're locked in a particular area for hiring, you don't have a big pool to choose from. So having a broad distributed hiring strategy is super helpful. To unlock your hiring strategy. But when it comes to just learning and skills to stay up to date with technology, people really do need to have a learn with a growth mindset mentality from day one.
No doubt. We have some more questions coming in, and so let's jump to some here. And this one is from Shazad. Traditional full stack development is gliding its path towards AI-driven multi-stack, mm-hmm. and that will completely shift. What are your thoughts on this, Abe?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It is full stack, multi-stack. I like to go back to the days of Microsoft Foundation classes and all these different frameworks that existed, Silverlight, WPF on Microsoft side, and Cold Fusion with Adobe, and all these different platforms. Figuring out which one to invest and spend your time on is super hard. You really do need to look at the big indicators, and there's things like StackShare that shows you which companies are investing in which technology in terms of percentages. If as an individual, if you want to look at where to put your time, because you only have so much of it, it's really precious to put your time on things that actually are going to matter and buy you longevity in your career, to get traction in different places where you want to work. To look at the top 70% of adoption technologies on companies like StackShare.io, that'll tell you where the critical companies are actually investing and using open source or using state-of-the-art technologies, so that you can start investing in those areas versus trying to spread yourself too thin and not really understand deeply on a particular technology stack. So I would say getting too deep in one area of AI and not learning in others, given that AI is so strong right now, might be a weakened path for your learning. But it won't hurt you. I think having multiple areas of expertise and different platforms for AI will only make you better. I don't think that's a waste of time at all.
I absolutely agree. And I love it. We have more questions popping up. This one is from Mario. What is your recommended approach to governing and keeping the use of AI in an organization under control, and how to select the tools to use?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts here, Rick?
Yeah, so you pick an approach, either build internally with something like Llama, and then you invest in the storage with a particular cloud, either within your own data center or within a cloud, to manage that governance. And then so you can go with Copilot with Microsoft and use their enterprise sandbox and their environment. So you get your IP and your PII all protected. But then there's also the controls that people will always try to pop out and go use something outside of your enterprise level prescripted tool set, and that's where the danger happens, right? So from an internal governance perspective, you want to keep people from using those tools externally, like similar to the way you would block someone from using an email system you don't want them having access to, so that they don't accidentally run ChatGPT and leak your whole repo, or put a document in it for a review that's sensitive to check the spelling, or rewrite the grammar or something. You don't want to let that happen, because those accidents do happen and they're costly. So that's
no doubt. And I keep pointing back to this recent Disney developer. I mean, the poor guy was just trying to be productive, but it wasn't an approved tool, and caused problems, and he lost his job over it.
It's not if, it's when. It absolutely happens, and you just have to be ready for it. Not just with locking the controls down, but the messaging internally to let everybody know that this happened. We can't allow it to happen. Reminder type thing. That has to be built in through your entire HR policies, your legal and compliance. Everything has to be aware of it, because the situations do happen. You will be exposed, and you have to be able to respond to it like a Set 1 in production.
No doubt. All right, we got another question here. I love it. This is from Mark. Mark, I'm in healthcare, not a dev, but an exec. Is there a place for an AI navigator or pilot in healthcare networks, hospital systems, etc.? It's always been a struggle to speak tech and healthcare together. What's your thoughts on this, Abe? I have some thoughts here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, having an AI advocate, a technology expert to help identify places where you can accelerate or facilitate automation for ease of access to information is a great way to go. One, they'll translate the knowledge for you to be able to make it accessible to other people, and start making systems and information more accessible for people for self-learning, and just create more transparency within the organization. Once you get it installed and useful to people, it propagates. It's self-propagating. So I think it's a great idea.
And from a Sonatafy Technology perspective, probably 60% of our clients are healthcare, life sciences, as well as fintech, where you have the highly regulated industries.
Yeah, you can train internally your entire health platform, all the information, documentation, and then start creating prompts for people to access it, or questions for self-learning and self-service. So the whole organization can become self-trainable once you've got AI enabled in your system.
No doubt. And one of the biggest problems we see in healthcare systems is there's so many components that they're interacting with, that even though you could set up certain things maybe to your main EMRs or EHRs you're connecting to, but you're dealing with so many different systems, there can definitely be a challenge for that. There's actually this aggregator website called there'sAnAIforthat.com, which is one of the best sites I've seen to kind of keep track of all the new AI tools coming out there. It's a big directory. They have by industry, they have by function. That's kind of the best aggregator tool that, Mike, to your question, this is always a good place to start. to spark some thought as to things going on in your industry and what's going on there.
Yeah.
Abe, any other recommendations you could think of there?
I would just say start small. Don't try to boil the ocean with AI. As you start working with it, as you start solving problems, you'll find other opportunities. It's really about building an automation mindset for creating access to information and then grouping the information and making it shareable in ways that people can consume it and benefit from it. And once you go down that path, you'll start seeing more and more opportunities and the ability to start parallelizing and leveraging AI to actually communicate and generate information on your behalf, because it starts to learn your behaviors and your working way. So the whole concept of agents and parallelization, using agents to actually do things on your behalf based on timing and scheduling is like, it's really moving fast. So there's tons of stuff that you can do with it. Just got to get started and start chipping away at it.
No doubt. All right, and thank you, everyone. And I see we have lots of questions come in. We'll try to get to all of them as we go through, and let's kind of switch gears here, Abe. And the golden challenge of how do you quantify ROI from an engineering team perspective? And CFOs, often their first reaction is, well, you got to go with the cheapest offshore resources that you could possibly find. And if you can't make that work, that's because you're a bad engineering leader. Versus having the right mix of, high-priced U.S. talent, having middle-priced nearshore talent, having lower-priced offshore. What's your take on this?
I mean, typically you work backwards from budget. So you have a certain amount of budget to work with, and you work backwards from that. Relative to, and you look at the problem you're trying to solve and where the workforce associated with your problem domain is located. If you're lucky enough to have a problem domain that is globally distributed, then you have and you're not time zone sensitive, then you have lots of options available to you. So you're making money go further. Right? You can leverage offshore, you can leverage nearshore, you can identify vendors onshore that can help you bootstrap and then start moving stuff to nearshore or offshore as needed based on how you want to build your model, either by augmented or by a build, operate, and transfer with an entity in a different country, or dedicated teams that work alongside you in different countries that help you, leverage your budget. But,
so let me flip this on you. In the software engineering world, it takes time, and sometimes big engineering wins. It's hard for non-technical executives to quantify what's being done. How do you quantify the cost versus ROI to non-technical executives?
Yeah, so it comes down to estimation and the cost of and benefit analysis of what you're going to deliver, the impact of the business for profit and revenue, and how much you're spending on it in terms of engineering dollars. So you can do a return on investment relative to the engineering capital used to build and what that product that you're building is going to pay back to the business in terms of revenue and profit. So you can look at that ratio as an investment strategy to figure out how much you're going to put into it. Now, after you've invested and after you've built, you can look back and say, did we get what we were looking for? And that comes down to measuring things associated with your engineering capital. How much money did you spend? Did you hit your timelines? What was the velocity, right? What is the amount of money you're paying still to maintain and continue to retrofit the product in long tail perspective? Are you getting the investment out of it? Is it more expensive or less expensive than like buying versus building? Those kinds of comparison analysis.
So, Abe, how do you go about measuring individual engineers and their productivity, and quantifying that between engineers you may have at 40 an hour, 80 an hour, and 200 an hour?
Yeah, so we've got some tools that we use to pull data from our GitHub, so that we look at things like the rate of commits, we look at PRs, we look at lines of code, lines of code per bugs generated, like defects, as a backstop to velocity. So we look at features, we look at the value essentially. So we measure things by value created. So we marked our all of our features that we're working on as value-oriented features or infrastructure that are enablers. And we commit to value because value is something that is impacting the business. It's improving the customer experience, or it's generating value for revenue or profit for the business, or increasing the general perception of the product from external perception perspective. So we measure all those things. We measure something called customer sentiment relative to velocity. So a correlation coefficient of customer sentiment relative to velocity, or our latency, our SLA. So if our SLA is down, is the sentiment low? Did it go down? If the SLA is doing well, it's hitting a number, is our sentiment still down or is it going up? So we look at those correlation coefficients to determine how we're building, how we're delivering, and then we start incrementally looking to focus in on the delta between our velocity and our value delivery. Like where are we missing the gap? You want your velocity and your value delivery to intersect. When there's a gap in between those two, you're typically having either a high operational load, some customer sentiment issues associated with engagement that's causing you to have to go back and work with the customer. Customer experience is having issues, creating a lot of operational load. So you're shifting away from value-oriented delivery and having to go deal with business continuity and resolution in your products and production. So we use, for individual developer tracking, in order to determine how developers are working. And this is also for them managing their own career. This isn't looking at all of our developers all the time. It's really about helping them understand how they measure up relative to the industry so they can track their own performance and figure out where they need to improve. But also as an organization, in aggregate, track, are we improving and how are we incrementally improving? And we can retrospectively look back when we change processes to see how we impacted our process and our development.
And what tools do you like for managing engineering metrics and productivity? And I know that, large organizations and smaller ones are going to be using different tools based on cost. And, this is probably the number one challenge that we're always teaming up with our clients to help them justify the productivity of the engineering team to if it's a non-technical CEO and CFO.
Yeah. So we use a tool called Flow. I think it's a great tool for introducing to organizations that don't have a lot of knowledge about how to measure developers and product teams, to help understand the speed of development, what it should look like, what the baseline is, help you establish a baseline and then incrementally show how you're improving based on initiatives that you're installing, like you're going through a DevOps transformation. Why is it going to make us faster? How is this making us better whenever everyone has to learn a whole bunch of new things? How is this going to make quality better if engineers are learning how to test? And you can measure all these things and show the benefits with a tool like Flow, because it basically provides scorecards for every engineer, shows their PRs, their commits, the number of lines of code, their total impact, and then it allows you to roll that up in aggregate for teams and for multiple teams within a specific engineering organization. And then you can compare and contrast, but it'll let you look at, okay, when did we go trunk based? Well, when did we go to a full SDLC containerized applications deploying directly into production? We went full DevSecOps, and now we've created all these triggers that used to be manual with lots of sign-offs to an electronic sign-off, an automated full automation, so it goes straight to production. Those kinds of triggers are all trackable, and you can see the bumps increase in velocity through this tool because it aggregates all that information. It'll allow you also correlate your incident tracking with your deployments, so you can do things like DORA metrics and automatically roll all that up, so that you can really, from a company perspective, overall see how you're doing, and from an individual engineer and organization level by team, you can see how you're doing as you change.
And you were mentioning Flow, that plural site Flow,
right? Yep.
Which we've absolutely seen is a phenomenal tool, definitely a costly tool meant for larger organizations. And we've seen clients that have that set up and are phenomenal with it. And we've seen clients that have it set up in a manner that they're not getting the metrics they need. What advice would you have, relative to pluralsight flow when somebody's inherited an implementation of it and it's
Yeah.
not tracking what the business wants.
Right. Using a tool like Flow does require some executive buy-in. When if you're a CTO or an SVP of engineering and you're chartered with demonstrating a wholesale uplift in performance, it's really critical that you have a baseline and you can track that because the data doesn't lie, right? Once you start tracking everything, you can show that we did these initiatives and now we're seeing an uplift in velocity. We're seeing hygiene improve, general developer behavior. We're seeing things like test gates being installed and developers are checking in tests, and we can trust them. We're using trunk based. They're checking in where downtime and breakages in the repositories aren't happening anymore. These are all validations that your processes are working, and you can track that within Flow. But it's critical that you have an organization within your company, like a service organization, platform engineering, that owns that as a managed service and owns all the integration points between the different places where you track, whether it be incident management, your defect tracking, or your repo. And all that information needs to be correlated and then pulled into Flow, and then dashboards created so that you can show this to everybody and get people great transparency for those numbers. So that's what we did. We used Power BI.
You can't just spend a bunch of money implementing this and it's magic and it just automatically does everything you want?
Out of the box, it looks good, but if you really want it to be useful, you need to massage it. Yeah.
What about smaller organizations that may not have the budget for an enterprise tool like that? What advice would you have for smaller engineering teams?
So Dora is a standard for publishing metrics, and that information can all be gleaned from Git or Jira or other incident management tracking tools like OpsGenie or other. So you still need an organization to own that data, where it's placed and tracked, and then aggregate it, and then publish it to dashboards. So it's feasible. There's a very limited set of information you need to pull from Git, and if you go to a GitHub or other places about how to track performance metrics off of Git, they have all of it documented and all the APIs are there. So it's very easy to automate pulling data out of Git, putting it into a database, and then putting some monitoring on top of that to publish changes and then graph it and build some pretty simple dashboards to give you everything you want to know. You can have a leader chart on PRs, a leader chart on commits per day, a leader chart on bugs committed relative to lines of code, velocity numbers, which is just an aggregate of commits over time for deployments, and you can get everything you need with little effort or little spend, like $50,000 to $100,000. You can have it all up and running, and then probably not have to mess with it much. Which would be
on a different note, how are you preparing for board meetings, stakeholder meetings, when they may have the perception that engineering's not doing well, and it's easy to blame the engineering team for everything. The salespeople aren't selling, it's the engineering fault. Or you have new leadership come in, or new investors come in, new board members, and you're going to get drilled on everything engineering. How do you go about prepping for those meetings to justify the cost and the ROI of the engineering team?
Yeah, I need to be fully aware of the performance of the overall organization, top, middle, and low at any given time, and understand where it can grow and where it can shrink in the midst of external pressures around financial concerns. The ability to know how to navigate the extremes in terms of economic conditions is critical. So you don't say, I must have these people all the time, or I have bandwidth to grow. I can make it faster if I add more people, or we're at a wall, more people won't matter. But being able to speak to the challenges that you're seeing as an organization and quantify the rationale for it is super important. So if you're having issues in production, they usually come from something. It's either because you've lost knowledge to manage what you have, you've inherited something that's very difficult and fragile and breaks all the time, and but you're not putting any investment in fixing those things. You're continuously on a treadmill of new features, and you're not backfilling and fixing the things that you're currently built on top of. So you're constantly putting pressure on the house of cards.
Yes, when you don't have a solid foundation and you keep building on top of it, that can get tricky.
So it's really about not taking things personal and creating awareness for the situation, and being accountable for these are the things we can do to mitigate the challenges that you're seeing. Everything's solvable with time and money, right? And now if you need to upgrade your staff, you need to upgrade your staff. Are you going to new technologies? Well, seed your team with people who can cross train and dig the trench for everyone to follow. Yeah, it's pretty much just be an open book, come prepared, don't get defensive, and have strategies for solving problems that make sense, and take the company's best interest into mind.
I know every engineering leader loves trying to justify engineering costs to execs that don't understand the first thing about software or engineering. And so you've been an expert at this, and always having a calm tone and walking through whether it's non-technical or very technical people. And that's definitely a skill all engineering leaders need to master.
Absolutely. Identifying talent is critical. And I think one of the first things we did here at Origins is get all engineers interviewing, train everybody on interviewing. You can't build a scalable engineering organization if you're not investing in interviewing skills. You can't farm your next generation of leaders if people don't know how to interview. You can't promote to management if they can't interview. So training people on how to interview, learning to assess talent, is a career fundamental for growth, and it helps the organization scale. So that's something we focused on first, and it's helped a lot. It really builds a level of maturity all the way from the IC into management and leadership that has had a huge impact.
Well, I couldn't agree more, but I need you to kind of keep that on the down low, because that's a big reason why companies come to Sonatafy, because they don't know how to interview engineers, and it is an art and a talent. I'm obviously saying this jokingly, but that's a great point you bring up for mature teams. Making sure engineers know how to interview other engineers is absolutely key. Let's switch gears, and I want to get your take. Now, Sonatafy, our specialty is nearshore software development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But tell me your take on where you see you should have people onshore in the U.S., where nearshore works best, where offshore works best. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
All three are essential for different strategies in business and how you're trying to address your solutions. Some companies have products they build that are time zone sensitive. So nearshore, onshore are pretty critical. There's no tolerance for an offshore. And it also may be because you don't have people in your organization that have experience managing remote teams, distributed teams in a disparate time zone. So those sorts of things can preclude that offshore as a strategy right up from the get-go. But if you do have people in your organization that are savvy with offshore management, hiring, then that's an option. Then it comes down to, do we have solutions that enable us to ship entire product definitions to an offshore organization for end-to-end development, or do we have people that we can use from an augmented perspective where they can join teams offshore and we can deal with that time zone disparity? So if you have the bandwidth from an internal perspective to deal with that time zone disparity, you can benefit from the cost. So typically offshore, depending on where you're taking your offshore, can be significantly less expensive than, say, onshore. But nearshore is fairly competitive with any offshore in Europe, for example. I think the most, I would say, challenging based on culture is offshore in Southeast Asia, just because of culture. But there are great spots there to get work done. I think nearshore with Latin America has been up and coming for the last 10 years and really started to show off. There's a ton of companies like Wiseline and ThoughtWorks that are on the same path as Sonatafy, demonstrating massive value in the up-and-coming talent being generated out of Latin America. That's in lots of companies you wouldn't even know, but they're the foundation for a lot of significant companies here now. So I would not, yeah.
And as a guy who I am not a software developer, I'm very technical, and every organization I've led, it's always been about building software. For me, around like 2016 was kind of the time when I saw that where cloud and mobile technologies were advancing, that you couldn't just have somebody offshore in a market like India or Asia that, come 5 p.m., you're having an hour or two overlap with them, telling them everything, what to do, and hope overnight they do everything, and you got to cross your fingers. That was kind of where I saw for software development. When we're talking IT and across the board, there's phenomenal uses for offshore, but specific to product development, software engineering, that's when I saw it really change, where it's hard for a software developer. There's too many paths to take if you don't have someone to collaborate the whole time during, let's say, your 8-hour shift that you're working. It's easy to get stuck or go in the wrong direction.
Yeah, you, as a leader managing teams that are collaborating with offshore or even nearshore, you do need a point of contact that's mitigating the communication, so you can reduce friction and cognitive load on developers. You really want them solving problems and not spending too much time and getting exhausted communicating over the time zone. So anything that leadership can do to mitigate that is going to make that a much smoother process. I mean, cost aside, the culture and the morale impact of over investing on collaboration through heavy communication can't be ignored.
When do you think it's best for teams to engage talent outside of the U.S.? And if you do it directly, or you go through a company like Sonatafy or any of the other great companies out there, what's your take on that?
It's where it really is where there is a technology specialization. There are companies that focus on fintech, companies that focus on algorithm or AI. Now everybody's claiming they've got an AI center, right? Whether it be or science platforms, like Ukraine's been great on math-oriented problem solving. Then you've got Southeast Asia that can do a lot of the chip-based design and software. Microsoft platforms pretty heavily, and then in Latin America you've got generalists that are really familiar with open source because they're really living and breathing that open source technology. And they've got great work ethic. And so between Southeast Asia and Latin America, I'm seeing great work ethic, drop in. They just work really well with US teams, and they compete heavily with onshore vendors. So from a price and performance impact perspective, they're on par, and they make it a great value. The communication's really good these days. Typically these top end teams, which have the skills you need from a fintech perspective, English is really good. And they're working in the same DevOps mindset model. So people are full stack. They may be specialists, but they can cover the whole thing if needed. And they have the pod-based model, and they have the augmented model, and the fully owned managed code model. So they really do make it very easy to engage with them and get work done, and map to your time zone if needed even. That's less popular, but it is possible sometimes.
Excellent. Well, and let's go to. I know there's a lot of questions, and I apologize if we can't catch everyone's question. This one stood out from Ashish, asking the biggest challenges for data engineers and data analysts, especially with AI evolving so quickly. What's your thoughts on this, Abe?
I think cost in managing data and creating a safe data lake is critical, and then how you train your data and start using the AI tools to replace some of the more costly things like Tableau. So getting an interface on top of your data that you can expose internally to your system that uses natural language for querying to generate the things you need for problem solving is going to be the next step. So getting that infrastructure in place that is cost effective, that allows you to easily generate these pipelines to continue to fortify your data, cleanse your data, and then make it accessible through AI, through natural language for dashboarding and other question and answer is kind of key.
No doubt. And thank you for that question. So as we're wrapping up this session, and it's been such a wild, 2025 has been intriguing as heck in the software world. Everything from, we know 2024 was brutal. Companies weren't getting funded. Engineers were being laid off left and right. We've seen everybody optimistic in 2025, but now only top performers. You got to use AI. You got to be more productive. It's a hyper competitive market. I absolutely, a lot of the comments we have coming in on the chat are people want to quote you, Abe, on a great engineering team needs to know how to interview their next level of engineers, which I think if I was to take one nugget from this session that everyone should take from an expert like yourself who has been around a long time dealing with organizations large and small, it's certainly never a dull moment in our space.
No, it's always changing. Nothing, the only constant is change. And if you want to stay involved, it's continue learning, learn with a growth mindset, operate with an owner's mindset, and you'll always be relevant.
And thank you so much, Abe, for taking the time to do this fireside chat.
Absolutely.
We've very impressed with the audience count we've had here. With and I apologize if you had questions that we weren't able to get to. Very exciting. Abe Jarrett, Senior Vice President of Engineering for Origins. Really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and insights. And you're always my go-to guy when I have an engineering challenge that we can't figure out. And I appreciate you coming on and for this fireside chat.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was very fun.
And to all the listeners, thank you so much for joining. We appreciate it. And feel free to contact us every time. Everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.